as Medina said, my name is Niall Arkham, the Program Manager here in the RDI Hub. Just before I invite Barry to share his story, I just wanted to say that we're actually hiring another Program Manager here in the RDI Hub and a Production Manager, and the closing date is Sunday. So if you like what you see, what's happening in the RDI Hub, and you'd like to be involved in it, please get in contact, send in an application, and we'll take it from there. So, calling over to Barry. Absolutely delighted to have you here this morning, Barry.
Thanks, Niall and Redden and everyone else. Thanks for having me. It's great.
Good stuff. And I believe you're on, well, almost on leave at the moment.
Almost. It's getting close. It keeps getting that little bit further away, though, unfortunately.
So we appreciate it even more. I was just going to start off with saying that we're 585 days into this global pandemic, right? The day that the nightclubs and the music venues are going to reopen. Yeah, so just in that context of that, tell us a little bit about Provizio and the problem that you solve.
Yeah, so yeah, I'll try not to bore people too much with the technical aspects and all that fun, but just to kind of give the background, right, that where Provizio came from. With my previous company, like my background is aero defense, so would have worked a lot in radar and comms for everything from, like, you know, satellites through to helicopter landing systems, through to missiles, through to all that fun stuff over the years. And a number of years ago, I was approached, our company, we were approached by pretty much the #1 autonomous group in the world. And basically anytime anyone from autonomy had ever contacted me, I always went, listen, come back when you're serious, right? We build aerospace grade technology. You know, the stuff you're putting on vehicles is frankly bullshit. So in fairness, those guys came back and said, actually, we have Project Aerospace, and it's because we realized cars are just missiles on wheels, and so we'd like that grade of technology on the vehicle. And that was kind of my first foray into autonomy and that. And I suppose as I got more into it, I discovered, you know, all the holes. I discovered all the nonsense, all the, you know, I mean, you obviously have to build hype to raise money, right? But like, this was ridiculous. We were going to have autonomous vehicles in 2017. We were going to have them in 18. We were going to have them in 19. We were not going to have them anytime soon. And everyone in the industry kind of knew that. And so the other thing we discovered as well was, like, level 0 to 5 autonomy, kind of as people talked about it, made no sense, right? So, like, there was certain environments that you could maybe have level 3 or 4, and other environments where you couldn't possibly, and it needed. So kind of, to be honest, like, we kind of started to look at that as well and go, there's a real, like, monstrous problem here and now. And everyone's talking about this future. And of course, the autonomous industry would say, well, we can solve road deaths if all vehicles are autonomy. That isn't how things work, right? Someone doesn't snap their fingers and all vehicles are autonomous. So kind of started looking at the problem a little bit differently and actually saying, well, let's just solve the hard bit, right? Let's leave the driving around in circles to Silicon Valley, and let's see if we can solve the hard bit, the reasons we crash, right? And if once you start to dig into that, you start to understand that that's what's going to keep autonomy away as well, right? So long story short, we looked at building an active safety platform from the ground up. So, like, completely agnostic in terms of technology, completely agnostic in terms of software. We just said, how could we build the perfect driver, right? And for now, that means working with you, the driver, the human as well. And then, sorry, there's like, I'm in a bus station. I don't know if someone's have we the possibility to mute there. That would be great. So yeah, so really, we just started looking at that safety being that path to autonomy, and how would that look like from a sensor level, but also from a software and a platform level. And that was the foundation of Provizio. And so I had this idea of this all-seeing kind of system that could see way beyond human line of sight, that could do things that we as humans can't. Because when you take accidents into account, basically most of them always come down to lack of vision or foresight, right? If you had known the car 4 cars ahead was going to brake, you would have braked sooner, right? And there's a bunch of these. Surely that's not my stomach. That's someone else. And there, so basically, started working back from there and designed a platform from the ground up. And then I suppose I did what I normally do. I put my kind of idea in front of some of the smartest people I knew. And one of the things that autonomy group did was put us together with a bunch of ex-Carnegie Mellon robotics profs. And we, they did the software and we did the hardware. But I wanted to do the full stack for Provizio, put it in front of those, but also put it in front of the lads I've worked with for years, the really smart, hardware guys and that as well. And unfortunately, they all thought it was a good idea. Because you are hoping someone will say, no, you jackass, start again. But they didn't, and they all came on board, and that's really where Provizio came from. So what we're essentially doing in a nutshell is building an active safety platform, and how a user, you as an end user, would interface with that is, when you buy your vehicle, that's the dumbest it'll ever be. And what it'll do is it'll monitor you, but it'll also monitor the entire environment. And it will identify potential crashes before you could ever see them and give you warnings. And if you don't heed those warnings, it'll learn from that as well. So if we tell you brake and you don't brake, we're taking that data into account as well. And that's essentially the backbone of it. And eventually what we want to get, because there's always this talk about this ethical dilemma, right? The trolley thing of, autonomous vehicles, and should we let them drive? And, is it unethical? We want to get to a position where it's unethical to leave a human drive. So in certain scenarios, we'll get to a point where we'll know more and have seen more than you as a driver, and then we'll take over the driving. And slowly but surely, that's the path to autonomy as far as we're concerned. That's the thesis, right? That's what we're pitching out there. There's kind of no point in being right. There's an awful lot of dead people who were right on the road, right? There's no point in having right away if you're going to get into a car crash. So like that's where we want to just make sure this gets spread and it's ubiquitous, and we all start to learn from it. And so Helgen is a part of that.
Very good. Listen, I'm gonna so you've raised a load of money. You've defined a really huge problem. You've redefined a huge problem, and a fresh approach to tackling that problem. So that's where you are right now with Provizio, right? Let's take it back. I want to go back into a bit of your educational background and your early days as an entrepreneur. Could you take us all the way back, to we'll say national school in Limerick, and your story? And I also want to link it all the way up to the immersive School of Engineering, the UL. If we can kind of bring that into a narrative, it'd be beautiful.
There you go. There's a stretch of 40 years. Here we go. You'd be talking about a huge problem. Well, that was certainly my school days were a huge problem. So I'm from Limerick, so I'm from Cartonish, just out the road here. And primary school was all good for me, but secondary school was when it all kind of fell apart, right? So I'm dyslexic, but we didn't have dyslexia back in 80s and 90s Ireland. We had lazy shits, right? That was basically what my teachers would have described me as, and I wasn't, right? And so the worst thing you can be in secondary school in Ireland is that your teachers know you're capable of something, but but you're not performing, right? But that will I really didn't give a shit about the teachers. For me, that was a real struggle, right? So I knew I had more capability, but my performance was terrible, and that leads to a cycle of disruption, right? So school, long story short, didn't work for me. And I dropped out of school in 5th year, went back again in 6th year, dropped out again. And eventually I ended up doing the Leaving Cert myself. So that led to a kind of a process ongoing that I worked kind of better on my own, right? So that was kind of, so that got me through the Leaving, which was great. And then I, CAO, CAS form, put that in. I'd kind of discovered art when I was in kind of 5th and 6th year. It was, to be honest, an art teacher discovered me. Because in CBS, I went to CBS Sexton Street here in Limerick. I would not recommend it. What you got? But I was pulled up I was doing a bit of graffiti, as you do, because I didn't spend a lot of time in class. And to be fair, I was caught by a geography teacher, well-known hurler, actually, Joe McGrath. And to be fair to him, he didn't bring me to the principal's office. He brought me down to the art room, right? And I'd never done art or been involved. And Charlie there, the art teacher, he took me on as a bit of a pet project because he used to do these private classes, and he let me sit in because I didn't have any money. And he let me sit in. He sent me home with a lump of clay that evening and said, "See what you do with that." And I came back with this devil the following morning, and he was going, "Oh yeah, we'll keep you." So that was kind of my foray into art, and I really enjoyed that. So long story short, CAS time came, I applied for Limerick School of Art and Design, and I applied for engineering in UL. And luckily enough, I got both. And to be fair, my man got involved there. You can imagine, right? Like, I'm describing this as being, and then I popped out of school a few times, right? You can imagine my poor mother, right? I'd say she aged 40 years in my 4 years of trying to do me leaving. But yeah, that's it. She had a chat with me and kind of went, you know what? Like, because get university, like, I didn't know many people who went to university, like my parents, my parents didn't do the junior cert, that kind of way. I didn't grow up in that environment, so it was, UL, like I knew some, like, this would be huge. But to be fair, she had the word in the ear and said, look, you love the art, it's where you're happiest. Just go down that line, you know what I mean? And like, choose something you love rather than what you think might deliver a job, right? Which was unusual at that time in Ireland, trust me. And I did, and that was the best decision I ever made. Like, art college was awesome. Like, I thought I wanted to be a painter. I discovered very quickly I did not have the mindset for painting. So I never submitted anything in that regard. No patience, no, like, just manic. But I found design, and I love design. But I think what art college is really good at is developing, like, they call it critical and contextual studies, but it's literally the ability to self-criticize and to assess your own work and improve it consistently, right? So you start off day one, you're always putting your work up in front of other people and presenting it, and they're giving you a bit of a hard time, right? And then by the time you're finished your 4 years, you're able to do that yourself. And like if you took nothing away from the experience, only that ability is probably the best thing you could ever. And we don't do enough of that in universities and other courses, right? That putting it out there, putting it in front of others, and learning from their feedback, and then the ability to parse that data and bring it on, right? So that heavily influenced, me going forward as well. The other thing you come out of our college with is a portfolio, right? So you go and do an interview, and you are there, you're a 3D being with work, and you can say, I can come in tomorrow and deliver something for you. So like that those were two huge things I took from our college. And then so I met these two entrepreneurs, right? And I didn't even know what an entrepreneur was, right? But these lads, they were Galway men originally, but they were lecturers in UL. And they had spun out a company back in the 80s, right? And taken on VC money. What the fuck was that? And then they had like sold it to like a Swiss multinational. But anyway, long story short, they were going again, and they were coming back together. And so they came and found me. Don't ask me how, right? Life's weird, right? But they came and found me. They came to the archive and said, look, we're looking for someone with a bit of this and a bit of that. And they went, oh, we know the guy. He's down there in a dark corner. There's something wrong with him. And they said, right, we'll take him. So that was kind of me meeting the Suguru brothers. And they were going again with a company, Amidion, and basically they'd done all the hard bit previously, built up hardware and done all that. And they went, screw that, let someone else do that. We'll own the front end. We'll own the bit that customers see. So I went off to France with the boys and spent kind of between, one of them lived in France, the other lived in Russia. So spent kind of 50-50 of my time between those for the next couple of years. Then we launched in China, and I went off there, and we were building aerospace test systems, right? So we were building national standards that were going to, because Russia was getting its electronics industry up and going. China was doing the same. So that was kind of the gig with the boys, and how, I ended up with them. And that was my introduction to entrepreneurship, because I genuinely didn't grow up with it. I didn't know what the hell it was. I didn't know what a VC was. I thought it was a vocational college. I didn't have a clue. So I learned an awful lot in that, and they'd been through it. And that was like, and I'd be a bit spongy, right? So like, I'm sure I drove them crazy for the first couple of years. And then started doing a couple of, so like we were kind of, anytime we developed an IP, we'd spin it out, right? And we did a few bits with some of the universities, Queen's University, we did quite a bit with, and a few other bits with DCU and others as well. So I kind of got to play a little bit of entrepreneurship on the side while I was doing the Immedion thing. And then I ended up eventually taking over as CEO. So I was the first employee, and then I ended up taking over as the CEO, which was great fun too. But of course, then I decided, I think I'd like to do something else and go full. The kind of side projects weren't enough for me, and so I decided I want to kind of go myself, and that was Oralis then, which was my last company.
Very good. Give us a very quick summary of Oralis. I know we could spend a whole hour on Oralis for sure. But like
yeah, and to be fair, Oralis was a quick journey as well, right? It wasn't designed to be, and it didn't feel like it, right? Like everyone around here knows it can feel very painful extracting this thing. But yeah, so Oralis I'd identified this opportunity in millimeter wave, very high frequency electronics. And basically it was used by the military for years, but it had lovely properties that made it ideal for things like autonomy, but also for communications and 5G coming over the horizon. But we kind of identified that we needed to get, stuff that was going around in horse boxes for the military. We needed to get that into something in the palm of your hand, right? So that was kind of the process. So what we looked at doing was building a European version of stuff that was happening in the US. So the Hittite of Europe was kind of my thesis. And it was basically bringing millimeter waves to chips, right? And getting it down into the chip level. What we discovered very quickly was, that was the thesis, but millimeter wave is very hard to deal with. So let's put it on a chip, and then more people can deal with them, right? But then when we got them on the chip, no one could deal with the chips, right? So then we had to start building modules, and then people were going, yeah, well, what do we do with these modules? So then we had to start building subsystems, and suddenly we were, building out. And then we were discovering companies were putting us together with software teams, and we were going, right, okay, because this is the only way you can actually start to solve problems. And slowly but surely you start to see that. And the moral of the story, we were kind of out in, in our 2.5 years in, we'd done a seed round. We'd like ACT Venture Capital, Enterprise Ireland, Kernel Capital come in on that. It's like 1.2 million, which felt like a lot of money at the time. Today's word, it's like, what, 1.2 million? It fell down the back of the couch, right? But that was a lot for us. Built that, got some really good customers, NASA, European Space Agency, Airbus, Boeing, all these people started taking us seriously. We were profitable when we went out raising money, which is probably the worst thing you can possibly be. You know what I mean? They're like, Jesus, who let this guy into the building? So that was kind of so we were out. I'd moved over to America, moved over to LA. Like that's the center of aero defense and funky stuff, right? Really cool stuff. Like we were doing stuff with like the skunk works, right, of these places. It was really cool stuff. And out raising money, Series A. And it was interesting, like we had a great face for corporate money, like Boeing, Airbus, they loved us, you know what I mean? But I was in Sand Hill Road trying to ram something they didn't want down their throat. And I was here we were, I was back in school again. I was going to prove everyone wrong. And around that time, then I came back and had come to Jesus with my co-founder, Mike, and had a chat around that. And it was inspired by one of our non-exec directors, and I'm a big believer in having non-execs around you, especially people that will take no shite from you. And we had a cup of coffee, and he said, have you actually talked to Mike? What a simple thing to say. Have you talked to your co-founder about all these ideas you have of growing this? And I said, no. So I did talk to him, and the end of that conversation was, if we could sell this tomorrow, would you? And he said, oh God, yeah. And Mike is 20 years older than me at the time, and that is, well, he's still 20 years older than me. That doesn't check. But so basically, yeah. So that kind of, and I said, oh, okay, well, like, so Hong Kong private equity group we had met as part of the fundraising, and they were really interested in investing. We kind of went a bit awkward raising Silicon Valley money and Chinese money at the same time. They don't like to mix on the cap table, right? So we kind of said no, and I was like, okay, text them, and he texted them, and that night I was out for dinner with my wife, and I got a message saying, yeah. They said, yeah. And Oralis, we closed the deal on pretty much within a week of our 3rd anniversary. and it was sold. And now it was a funny one because they were investing as well, and we were staying on. Like they were buying into our vision because it was private equity. Like it wasn't like we were being bought by Intel and we were all going to become drones. Like this was, we're back in this company and we're going to IPO it in a couple of years and all that. So that was it. Like, and I was still CEO and still they were buying into my vision. But sure, look, you know, after a while, and I threw myself into the work, traveling like a good thing, and it was going and that company's flying. Like Aralis is still flying, it's still Aralis, right? And they're going gangbusters, and they've built amazing stuff. Like people don't even realize, like a few months ago they put a satellite up that had the fastest internet speeds from a low Earth orbit satellite ever shown, right? So way beyond Starlink. Like, this is, you know, a Limerick company, which I'm really proud of them for doing it. I didn't do it. I was gone, right? I was on the beach. But that drove on. But after a while, like the old me started kicking in, going, screw these guys, I want to do my own thing. So I left after about a year and a half then.
Listen, I know everybody who's on the call here will realize and recognize that we're only pulling slightly on the threads here, and there's loads more great stories and lessons to be learned from it all. So what I'm going to move is into a bit of a wrap up here now for the last minute. I'm going to just cite off a couple of things in terms of lessons learned, just so people can bring these into the breakout rooms and discuss them and come back for the Q&A after. Some things that you've said over time is like being comfortable asking smart people dumb questions. We'll get into that later. The 2 best times to sell a business, we'll get into that later as well. You're putting on your angel investor hat, you know, thinking about market sizing. We'll come back to that, right? Entrepreneurship as a mental illness. We'll pick away at that later as well. But before we just go into the breakout rooms, how about just a little bit of a chat about what you're doing in Provizio there, about what turning the work-life balance into a competitive sport, essentially, amongst the team there.
Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. No, it was one of the things about going again and going back to it. Like, and you do have a long chat with yourself about it. And one of the things I wanted to do was, I didn't want to make anyone else's, on my own, by the way, I wanted to take a bit of my own advice. I didn't want to make anyone else's life misery, right? Which startups can be, right? So I wanted to set out from the beginning with an environment that you could actually have a life, right? That basically, and you could actually, you know, rear children and have a, you know, a normal. And so we were kind of remote before it became popular, right? Because we the lads in Pittsburgh, we the lads in Belfast, and we ourselves in Limerick from the very beginning. So kind of built in some processes to help with that, bring us together, but also to kind of almost force us to have the bit of work-life balance. So we have a kind of a program that we run within the company, and as well, there's no point in me, right, saying we're going to save 1.25 million lives a year, right? And sleep driving, for example, is a big contributor to that. And then getting people working till 4 o'clock in the morning every morning, you know, to get to meet their deadlines, right? So we brought in these kind of programs that looked at that somewhat, you know, culturally associated with the problem we were trying to solve, but also just in terms of having a life. So like something like we have a fitness thing, which is good as well, like Connor, who a Limerick man who you've stolen down there in Kerry, strength and conditioning guy, whose greatest achievement is an All-Ireland for Limerick. So we love Joe. So we run this program where we all have these MAPS belts and that, and it's not really competitive, and he gives us a talk every so often about nutrition and things like that. And basically, if you get to the WHO standard of exercise that you should get in any 1 month, that, you know, this adds up, and basically you get an extra half day off, right? That you have to take in the next quarter, right? So that's the thing. The reward is, so by looking after yourself, you get reward. So we also sleep monitoring, again, an extra half day for that. So basically there's kind of 2.5 days up every quarter for the following quarter, but you have to take them off. You have to and do it in the next quarter. So we've a mental health one, like, so there's like all sorts, like that can be, one of our guys is quite religious and is in the choir, so that's what gets him he hits the quota in that regard. You know, other lads were, you know, going to see psychiatrists and things like that. that's all included. You get extra time off if you participate in that. And it's been really good. It's given us like especially around the MAPS challenge, the fitness thing, it gives us a bit of fun to talk about in the kind of in the daily chats or whenever we get together. But also it's kind of given that thing of it's okay, not to be okay, and to talk about that. But also we've created an environment where it's like, yeah, I won't be at the meeting today because my kids are home from school sick. Fine, don't be there. You don't need to be seen to be busy. It's we've an atmosphere, I think, that's about the work and that it's there. And the other thing I'm not a fan of is kind of the forced fun stuff around, and it can be quite sticky in startups and that kind of thing. So I'd rather create an environment where you can go and spend time with your real friends, right? Or your family or that, rather than taking up any more of your time, having to spend time with me, that kind of way. So that's kind of been the approach. And we all have driver monitoring as well. So if you break the speed limit on a regular basis, you lose out on that extra half day's holidays. So it's kind of 10 days holidays a year that you have to take on top of your other holidays that just for looking after yourself.
Well, we hear it so that you've seen the problem, you've taken a different perspective than everybody else. It's not company picnics for the whole family. It's you're doing it in a different way. So it's really, you've thought about it and you've designed it in for the proper solution. So so that all brings us back to the approach you're taking to solving road deaths as well, right? It's the exact same thing,
it's a funny one, and I think that can be a dyslexic mindset. I don't know, if people know much about dyslexia, but one of the biggest problems I found is you tend to see the solution before you've solved the problem, right? So and it can be. That can be extremely frustrating. That was really hard in school and that, because I was like, yeah, but I know how this is going to end up. So why do I have to go through all these steps, right? And I do think that you do tend to take a bit of a helicopter view, and I think that's been something that's been a bit of an advantage to me. My young lad is dyslexic as well, and so he's grown up seeing it as a superpower. You know what I mean? And
the gift of dyslexia, I think they call it these days. And
the dyslexic advantage is.
I'm cutting across because I can see Radine's anxiety mounting there. So we're over time. Are we ready to go for?
We're ready to go. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, Barry. We could listen to all day, but I'm going to throw you all into breakout rooms. You're going to have 20 minutes in there. We're going to rip you all back out for the talk around market sizing, all that good stuff. So we'll see you back here in 20 minutes.
Thanks all. Cool. Amazing questions, brilliant answers, and very, very rich and deep. But what I'd like to do now is maybe invite some of the facilitators of the other rooms to come unmute and feed in some of the questions and some of the discussion points that they had. Who have we got? Any hands raised there? Do I see?
No, I wouldn't mind jumping in if you want.
Good man, Andy.
Perfect. So in our breakout room, I suppose one thing we wanted to sort of discuss was, and it's sort of knowing when or knowing how to either scale or sell, or knowing which option is sort of better for your company, or maybe just getting a bit of clarity around the 2 times to sell your startup, because that phrase really caught my eye anyways.
Yeah, that's a funny. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, that was something when I was just chatting to Niall, and just something that came back. And I do think that's, from the evidence I've seen, there's kind of, in terms of the optimal time for you as a founder, right? I'm not taking an investor's view here, but there's kind of, as I've seen, and I've had a bunch of friends who've done well and a bunch of friends who haven't done well, right? And so when I say the early or late, the 2 times, they'd be the 2 times I'd suggest. And really it is early, you hold a lot of the equity, right? And so if you sell for a mid-sized outcome or a decent outcome early on in the business, you'll do very well. Okay, that's kind of it's a very basic approach, right? But once you go further and once you raise bigger money and you go down that path, you're getting obviously diluted heavily in each round. The risk profile is actually going up for you. They're de-risking the company with money. But your outcome that becomes less and less as you go. So and so many companies get kind of fire sold for big money, right? But the founders don't do well at all out of it. Like I remember, you know, a couple of years ago at Web Summit, literally a day or two before, one of the founders had sold his company, and I met him that night, and like it was a big number. It looked great on paper. He didn't get a single penny in cash. He got stock as part of something that was going to go. But like so, and so you kind of have that situation. So that's where, back to your first part of the question almost was, you know, when to take the money and when to decide whether it's growth or do whatever. It's really when it's constantly looking at how big can this be, right? And if you believe it can keep growing and it can keep being bigger and deliver the multiples of return, right? So you know, as you go along the journey, the seed investors are looking for 100x, the Series A's are looking for 10x, the next guys are looking for 3-4x, right? So you have to be able to prove that they can get that ROI, that the possibility is there. And if so, then keep going on the journey would be the way I look at it, right? But like, if you could be the next Stripe, fucking be it, right? But if you can't, it's better to sell before you move on to that next stage. Because once you take that tranche of money, right? If you take a tranche of money tomorrow at 100 million valuation, right? Anything less, selling your company for anything less than 100 million, everyone's going to be pissed off, right? And if you sell it for 100 million, which is an incredible outcome, and there aren't that many of them in Ireland, right? If you sell it for the 100 million, the guys that came in at that 100 million are going, nah, that's not what I invested for. I invested to get a massive return on that. And that's kind of how VCs work. So I think you just have to be very conscious of how their system works. Like I often hear people, no, I was this guy, right? So I was there with my profitable company going, these morons aren't going to invest in this. Like they're investing in, you know, internet dog food, and they won't invest in I have a proven company with blue chip clients and all that. They were dead right not to invest in us, right? Because I could survive without their money, and I was surviving and I was growing at a rate that wasn't, but I could never deliver the outsized return with the way I was building that company that they needed to satisfy their LPs. So and often when you hear from people is going, and they invested in that company and that company failed, they were right. With their business model, it was better to invest in that company that failed than it was to invest in your company that never had the potential to deliver the return for them. So I think that's the way people have. VCs sell money. That's their job, right? They sell money to you, right? So they want to give you that money. They've too much of it right now, right? So they want to give you that money. So it's never a personal thing. It's like that's gone now, right? That day is over. So they need to get rid of that money. That's what they were employed by their LPs to do, right? So if they're not investing, it's because there's something there that doesn't show that outcome is possible. And I think that's kind of the approach we have to take when we build companies. And there's nothing wrong with saying, right, I'm not going to take money. I'm going to just build this up, build a profitable machine and bring it on. Because their worst nightmare has been stuck in a zombie company that's tipping away and doing well. They all have them on their portfolio and they all hate them, right? Because it's like, and you might see something they got sold for 20 million or something like that. When the VC was in there for 13 years and half the partners are in a different organization, right? So that's the way they're kind of looking at it. So like failing fast is better for those guys. And so so it's a very basic thing. For you as a founder, you either need to sell when it's huge. So if it never has the potential to be huge, then because you know at that stage you might own 5, 10, 15% of the company, but you won't give a shit, right? If this is a unicorn and it sells for huge money or IPOs at huge money, you'll live with your 10, 15%, right? But otherwise, sell it early when you still own 70% of the business. You know what I mean? And where those early investors, maybe seed investors, like seed investors have a much like I do some seed investment. Like the second you write the check, you're going like that. I just might as well set it on fire, right? That's the way you look at it. You're more back in. This is a company I would love to do well. I want to like angel investors have a different approach to that investment. So like if you give them back their money, they're going nice one, brilliant, and you did well. That's brilliant, and sure we might do something together again. You know what I mean? Whereas VCs, it's like giving them back their money is like for fuck's sake, You think about it, that's returning the product. Their job is to sell money, and you've just given it back to them, and you think it's a good thing, right? So that's kind of the approach I would take to kind of thinking about selling. But don't build a company to sell it. Build a company that's going to solve a problem and have the potential to grow and be huge, right? And then you'll have people coming to try and buy you as you go along. There's a long answer to a short question.
Excellent. I'm going to come in there with a question that came in from Eamon Galvin there, who's just, because we're talking about that VC lens there, right, and the angel lens. How about like a revenue funded growth versus, you know, funded through investment for equity?
Yes, absolutely, right? Absolutely. Of course, Bill, if you never need an investor, you never have to talk to them, you never have to deal with all that crap. God almighty, like customers are the best funding ever, right? Like that's where investment money should be just if you need fuel to create a growth engine that's going to be a monstrous thing, right? That's really the only, like most of the time I spend talking to founders is almost convincing them not to take money. Like the amount of people think like I'm like, you know, even as an angel investor, people think I'm trying to decide or do due diligence on them and see if I trust them or believe in them. Balls to that. 90% of the time I'm trying to prevent them from going and building the wrong company or building something that's going to make them miserable for the next couple of years. Like it's just, I don't want anyone to go through that, right? VCs don't have that mindset because for them, like if you go through misery for the next couple of years, that's all right because you might crack something that could be big. So that's kind of the kind of mentality I think you have to come into this thing with, is they've got a different set of, they're not bad, right? I've been in the place where I've gone, oh yeah, we'll show these guys, right? They're not bad. They just have a different business model to you. But yeah, if you can grow and sell a company with just revenue from customers, that's the most perfect company ever. That's like, you never have to come to these things. You just keep the customer.
Good stuff. Barry, I see another question there came in there from Lee there about working with universities around spinning in and spinning out opportunities. How about that? He talks about that.
How about it?
Yeah. Well, like it's certainly it's challenging. I've seen a lot of promising opportunities maybe flounder either spinning in or spinning out over the years. To navigate that is like, you know, is the science and art, or what is it like? Because you've been successful in this. Somebody actually came to me with this question recently, and I was like, Jesus, who could I send them to? I thought, I was driving down the road about half an hour later, and I said, oh, Barry Lunn.
Yeah, like I've had great relationships with a couple of universities over the years, and we've done a lot. But going in with my eyes open as well with what a university can deliver, you know what I mean? Like they are research institutes. So if this is a core problem to your company, or it's something critical and core, like straight away I lose faith in you if you've said, yeah, and that core part of the company is in a university and being locked up in that, and we're kind of doing that. Like you have to go beyond that. You have to take it out of the university and bring it, or bring something to the university that they can solve a research problem, work on something that isn't on core but could deliver something really interesting for you down the way. And I think if everyone kind of goes with that approach, like anything, you know what I mean? If you understand what their deliverables are and they understand what your deliverables are, then it'll be a much happier relationship. So like we just literally signed off on a big investment again with University of Limerick that we're really excited about. And it's a 3-4 year program, right? The PhD is going to be working on, and the outcome could be nothing and the outcome could be extraordinary, right? But we don't know that, and that's the way we kind of have to look at it, and we'll be keeping an eye on it. I'm interested in what it's doing, but then the relation, like I think with the way things are going, like recruitment is probably the most difficult part of building a startup right now. It's probably what I spend most of my time doing, which isn't something I ever thought I'd say, right? So if you're not embedding somewhat with university, if you're going to build something big and extraordinary, where the hell are you going to get these people if you're not working with the universities earlier on and identifying talent early on? And like in Limerick, we see it here, like Analog Devices have been so good at that. Like they're around a long time. They're so embedded in the university, and literally the best grads, they've got them in, and they're, so if you're not doing that, you're going to have a problem. So I think that's kind of my master's thesis was on industry university interactions. So I've kind of had a bit of an obsession with it for years, around that whole thing, and just learning, like like the technology transfer office, like why does so much IP sit on shelves in universities? Firstly, it generally often doesn't solve any problem for society, right? That wasn't its goal. It was research. It doesn't have to. It was blue sky. But the second thing is, the technology transfer office would rather it set on, because of the way their reward system is, they'd rather it set on the shelf than make the mistake of giving something very potentially valuable away for a low cost, right? So I think if you kind of have that approach, but like the likes of Lero and a bunch of these guys have come along now, and they have a much more pragmatic approach to IP and all that. It used to be a bit of a nightmare, I would say, a couple of years ago. I think it's gotten an awful lot better. And the other thing here, and here I go, and never a short answer with me. Like, I'm very conscious it's taxpayers' money, right? Taxpayers' money has gone in there, right? So they're not being unfair by saying, well, if we do 150 grand's worth of research, we license you the technology, but you have to pay back the 150 grand. And then once the taxpayers got its money back, you can exploit it and do what you like. That's a very fair approach as far as I'm concerned. So I think, you kind of have to have that approach with universities.
So I'll just invite people to put questions in the chat or to raise your hand, and so we can address them to Barry there. If anybody wants to raise their hand, or just unmute and ask straight away, or pop into the chat. I see, yeah.
I'm going to jump in there because there was lots of questions in our room around market sizing, how to do it, where do you start, what's pie in the sky versus reality? How do you do good market sizing?
Yeah, and like I'm constantly thinking and working on this and trying to understand, and it definitely isn't the market sizing should be something that is moving. It's a moving feast all the time within your organization. But to start out, like, there's only 3 things I care about when I look at a market day one, right? Is it huge? Is it growing? And the last bit is the most important bit. Can I get a bit of it, right? And then I start working on the, can I get a bit of it? I stop thinking about the huge bit then, and I start working on the, can I get a bit of it? Because if it's not growing, that's a tough market, because there isn't space for new players potentially, and so it's going to be much harder. So that would be the very first thing, is in terms of that. And then, like, sizing it, right? Like you don't have to get into the complex marketing terms and all of that, right? You just have to think about it in terms of what you can deliver now, and what that could do for someone, and how much of the market then, that if you were doing that on a bigger scale, could you start to capture? And you start to grow against that and look at that. So, like, again, it comes back to the same. And so if you haven't worked that out, how the hell do you work out how much money you're going to raise and how much you need, right? So, like, if the market hasn't got the potential, there's no point in saying my company's worth 100 million if the market is worth 100 million, right? So you kind of have to scale it in that regard. But I think, like, you can but you have to keep thinking about it then as well, and understand what is your competition, what's your real competition if you succeed in what you're going to do. Because often you might be building a widget at the beginning, but that has the potential to grow into a platform so you need to understand. So that becomes, the follow-up market. That's the future market. So if you're able to show, right now, if I had this, I could capture this market. And then if I had a bit more, I could capture that market. And eventually I can get into the bigger market. But I do think, like, $1 billion plus markets, if you're ever thinking about VC, you have to be able to show that market does exist. And I think that's really, like, I would simplify it down into that, like, if your marketplace is pubs, you need to know how many pubs there are in the country, and be realistic about how many of them you could capture. And the other thing people make the mistake of as well, which is huge, is they assume someone will pay money for what you have, right? So the market might be huge, but if no one's prepared to spend money on what you have, so again, that comes down to the smaller scale of just getting one person to give you money and say that this has a value, and then growing from there and being important to them, and growing from there. And the other thing I would say on that, which I think is really important in terms of market, because it's about growth, right? And, like, so the market can be huge, and you could have a product that could be good for that market, but how do you achieve growth, right? Which is the only way that you can keep this whole thing going. And that, I've learned in time, is love, right? So everyone liked us in Oralis. They liked what we were doing. We could get in any door, right? No one loved us. We weren't solving a big enough problem for people that they absolutely needed to have it. So I would spend more time on I would spend more time with one or two customers finding love, building a machine that can grow into a monster. And then it's much easier. Whereas otherwise you're always going to be pushing up that hill and always trying to, you can never prove that you can actually capture that market.
Excellent. That's really good. Anyone else want to unmute there with a question? I'm going to read one from the chat now. So when going bootstrapped customer funded path, how can tech founders who are rubbish at sales get good at sales? And why is it considered a bad word in some circles, sales?
I don't know. I'm a salesman. Never shied away from it. My dad was a salesman. My two brothers are salesmen. It's just like sales, like whether it's selling a suit on the high street or in your startup. Like, no startup I've known to date died from too much sales. Right? You never read about that. You never read it too much sales. I think there's a little bit of a thing of people think they're too sophisticated for it, but everything is sales, right? You cannot grow the company if you can't recruit people. So if I can't sell my vision or what I'm trying to do to other people, I'm not going to get the best people to come and join me, right? So an awful lot of the recruitment side of things is me coming into the room with really smart people and pitching our business to them. It's not me looking at a CV going, and what are your hobbies? It's me going, this is what we're trying to do. Is this something you could buy into? That's sales. Like everything in startup is sales. So if you're not good at it, get good at it. Practice it. Get out in front of people. Like, you don't have to be like some sophisticated, smarmy guy in a suit coming in going, we're gonna sell you a monorail, right? You just, like, sales, like I learned this from my dad. Like, my dad was the quietest, most unassuming person you'd ever meet, right? He's probably the best salesman I ever met as well. He actually gave a shit about every person that walked into his shop. That was it. His funeral was ridiculous. It was like a fucking state funeral. We were there for hours. This man, if he was in the room, I did not get this from him. He didn't talk, right? He didn't, and I wasn't aware he had all this stuff to say. But he was like a psychiatrist. He listened to people's problems, and they came in and they'd come for that, and then they'd buy something because they felt guilty because they'd used up his time and he'd listened, right? I learned a lot from that. If you like, sales an awful lot of the time is just go in, sit down and listen to what they're saying, and you need to understand what they're saying. Find out what their real pain point. Don't use this assumption, right? Test it with them, and a good one can be just check in with them afterwards and go, like, we have this. If we were to look at any, what's your biggest problem? What's the biggest pain in the ass in your company right now? And over time, you might discover 9 or 10 people say that. And it's similar with advice from people like me. Like, don't take it as like, that's the gospel. That's my experience. But over time, if you start to see 9, 10 people starting to say the same thing, then that's it. That's sales. Like, and that has to feed into your product development, because otherwise you're just going to build something that people are mediocre on, people might like, but if they don't love it, it won't grow.
Great, as that taps into some of the customer discovery questions that were there. Also, we'll go a little bit further on the recruiting talent. And like, do you roll your own? Do you find how are you going about sourcing talent? And the question here is like, train in-house or expect new hires to come in with exactly the skills you need, or what are you doing at universities? How are you building all that?
Yeah, no, it's a bit of everything, right? Like, a lot of it is in the university side of things, and I see in that is like investing in the future, right? That you're assuming you're going to be around in a couple of years. There's a cockiness, so you're investing in that, and you're getting involved and what. But as well, you kind of have to take the approach of, whether I'm around or my company's around, we're going to have a better society, and you want people to be building, the skill sets to be part of that, right? Then it's just hard work, right? We use a combination of promotion stuff, like, because we've been kind of stealthy, it can be hard to attract people, so you're kind of hoping they pick up on bits here and there. So pretty much anytime you see us doing anything PR wise or doing anything like that, it's really about recruiting talent, right? Because we don't recruit customers like big OEMs or tier ones or that in the automotive space. Like they all they care about is what we can deliver, right? They don't give a shit about our 10-page website, and they're not trawling the internet to find good companies. So really 90% of what we're doing in that from a PR perspective is recruiting talent, that people start to go, oh, this is somewhere I'd like to work. And look, I think because the other thing that people forget as well is, right, it's so hard to recruit people, but then you got to retain them as well, right? To build an environment that's nice, that has that, and you know, training and all that fun stuff. Like anyone wants to do any course or whatever, we'll support it. You know what I mean? Like all our guys are off doing courses at different times to keep that skill set going, because we obviously get the benefit of it, but then it keeps it interesting for them. The other thing I'm a big believer in is allowing people to do side projects. I always did side projects in the other companies I was in, and it helped me satisfy that part of my brain that needed to be building stuff that was a bit more interesting. So I like a good bunch of our staff have like carve outs in their contract that they, like some of them, they're building startups on the side or doing whatever, and it might get left behind, it might get picked up again, but you're setting that tone from the beginning that this is a place that, you know, I actually, you know, if someone left me tomorrow to build a great startup, good for them. Be delighted for them, you know. I obviously miss them, but you know, that's kind of, so that's kind of my approach to recruitment.
Can I interject?
Yeah,
there, when you say you have a carve out for the contract, how do you work that, if you don't mind me asking?
I mean, we literally put in a carve out that this employee can work, you know, in their own time, can work on this project, and we name it, like we name exactly what it is and make sure like there's no IP conflict or whatever else, you know what I mean? But one of the guys is working on something that's very relevant to our space, but it's not competitive with what we do. So that's it. We just name it. We put it like good legals, especially if you're going down the fundraising route and all that. Good accounts, good legals, doing all that stuff. Just do it. Life is an awful lot easier.
Great, excellent. So one last question from the audience before I hand over to Radine to wrap. So I like this and how it's phrased. Looking back in time, what is one mistake from Anastasia here? Says one mistake you've made as a business person you wish you could undo.
That's a very tough question, and the reason is, and I know this is a cliche, I've learned something from all of those mistakes, like loads, like that, even that Silicon Valley experience and trying to raise down there and doing it wrong, like an awful lot of the time, even when I'm talking to people like you guys and stuff, I'm actually talking to myself as well, because I still do the things that I shouldn't, that are counterintuitive to my, you know, my approach, you know. So it is very hard. Like, you know, I wish I could have started earlier. I wish I could have done it when I was a bit younger. It would probably have been, but I wouldn't have had the learnings that I had and got to go around the world and do all that fun stuff as well. I think actually, yeah, one that would be very important to me. I was overeager for a long time, maybe just with a bit of age. I'm a bit more circumspect. I look at the utility of things more now. I wish I'd done that before. So in other words, you came knocking, I was on a plane, I was on your doorstep, I was there, and we were going to do business. I was overeager there. I didn't look at the utility, and I probably didn't listen enough to what people were saying. Like when people, like multiple customers or multiple VCs all say the same thing to you, listen, you know.
Oh, that's a really good place to leave it. That listening, and when you hear it repeatedly from many different angles, it can take quite a while for the penny to drop. For all of us, that's a very human thing. You know, we have our own vision of what we're presenting, and we're selling that to some degree as much as we resist the itch to pitch. But that listening thing, even from the likes of Barry Lunn, you've heard it. Right?
Yeah, but and by the way, and Barry Lunn needs to hear it more than anyone, right? Yeah. Like that's very important to state as well. Like I wish I was as good as the way I talk sometimes.
I'm going to say a quick thank you to everybody for all their questions and all their attendance and all the rest, and a special thanks to Barry, our guest of honor, and hand you over to Radine to wrap up.
All right, that was bloody brilliant. We could listen to you all day, let's be honest. So I'm just going to do a quick wrap, guys. A couple of dates for your diaries, right? The first one is November 19th. That is the next Founder Circle. This is the fundraising Founder Circle. It is the closed door session, not recorded. Founders come in, talk about the actual real life relevant experience of fundraising, either VC, angel, crowdfunding, and debt finance. So we have 10 founders who have literally just come off the back or have just signed term sheets. Everyone from Constant Llama to Frankly, Pingfit to Loanit and Lintel, they're all here. This will not be a recorded session. Closed door, please. So put that in the diary. NDRC Accelerator is now open. If you're interested, go to ndrc.ie or talk to Niall Larkin. He's a very approachable gent. Huge thank you to Barry. Honestly, Barry, you had me laughing and listening, which is not an easy thing to do, but huge thank you.
Thanks everyone as well. And the questions were brilliant as well. And I genuinely really enjoyed the session. Like, I'm always nervous coming into these things, but yeah, that was fun. So thanks for having me.
It was.
And
we'll have you back.
Yeah.
We'll have you back in Kerry the next time. Right. Okay, guys, we'll see you on the 19th. Thanks a million. Have a lovely long weekend.